Chapter 6. The Crossroad. Zethusela carefully surveyed the real-time sensor field telemetry being fed to his visual cortex. No sooner had they entered the sanctuary than a real-time security alarm had alerted them to a potentially very serious problem. Under more normal circumstances, running patrol was an uneventful yet still very precious highlight in Zethusela's daily routine. Since fleeing from the clutches of Nest Zetalia, being out on the meticulously maintained and regulated reserve while acting as both protector and guardian to a tiny slice of paradise, felt to him akin to communing with the idyllic past that he had spent so much time dreaming about when he was still a very young arachnid. Rather unfortunately, though, such pleasant thoughts, by way of urgent necessity, had to be unceremoniously banished from his mind. A proximity alarm had alerted them to the fact that they apparently had unauthorized guests in the sanctuary. More troubling still was that if this was actually true, then they also possessed the capability to scramble both their location and numbers. Zethusela's mandibles started to twitch irritably in perplexed consternation. The tech being used to monitor the reserve was legitimately state-of-the-art, and not even a Velaptian mesomoth could enter the sanctuary without them knowing exactly where it was, where it had been, and even where it was likely to go next. No, something about this anomalous alarm felt disturbingly off. Yet even so, all they had to go on right now was a generalized proximity alert, warning them that the real-time organic mass readings had undergone a net increase that could not readily be accounted for. For reasons unknown, the system could not provide even the most basic of details, other than the fact that the computed values simply did not add up. Having split up with his companion, the scientist now stood at the mouth of a dusty track. At first glance, everything seemed in order, as the click and chirp of the nearby fauna gently assaulted his ear. But something wasn't right. There was too much dust in the air. Almost as if guided by instinct, he cast a worried gaze down towards the ground. Booted footprints. That's what it looked like to him. He planted all three of his hands firmly onto the dirt. Faint residual heat, his suit's AI dutifully reported back. Zethusela eyed the dusty old cargo track suspiciously, and then signaled for one of his Wraith Seekers to switch itself into stealth and reconnaissance mode. He ordered it to follow the anomalous heat signature while relaying a real-time feed of its primary sensors back to his suit's AI. The small spherical drone blurred into the background like some kind of stealthy mechanical chameleon. With a momentary hum that pitched upwards into a frequency range far beyond his ability to hear, it fired up its anti-gravity microdrive and zipped its way along the trail with its faint shimmering outline quickly fading from view. Having signaled his companion with regards to this very worrying discovery, Zethusela now watched Zekaneman scuttling hurriedly towards him, all 9 limbs pumping up and down robotically. He had not yet voiced his central concern, but the uncomfortable truth was that this smelt suspiciously like an inside job, and if so, the situation they now found themselves in was likely as dangerous as it was volatile. It certainly seemed well outside the context of a typical civilian violation, or even the far more serious eco-terrorist strike, both of which were scenarios that their training had more than adequately prepared them to deal with. Zethusela now found himself very sincerely hoping that this was nothing more than a bizarre system glitch, or more likely, simple operator error, due to incompetence, negligence, or both. However, given the almost paranoid level of software and mechanical over-engineering built into the sanctuary's automated facilities, this seemed like a hope that was extremely unlikely to be realized. Zekaneman, who was flanked by 3 Wraith Seekers, which he had apparently already preemptively deployed from his combat suit, now found himself being harshly berated via some contemptuously terse instructions, courtesy of the Shihari scientist.
Seriously, Zekaneman, what in Zikadia do you think you are doing? Back it up, get off the track and keep your distance. Let's not make ourselves an easier target than we already are.
Zethusela let out a long, suffering sigh.
Well, in any event, I've deployed a Wraith Seeker to follow the residual infrared signature, so hopefully it can get a read on what we are actually dealing with here. My AI unit estimates that they passed through here about 10 minutes prior, and if so, my drone should have eyes on them any moment now.
Zekaneman, as instructed, obediently backed off from the main track before speaking.
Listen, I know you think this very unlikely, but I firmly believe that this is nothing more than a one-off temporal systems glitch. Perhaps then you should consider recalling your drone so we can request Central Command to shut everything down and run a full sanctuary-wide diagnostic.
Zithusala shook his head skeptically.
You may well be right. In fact, I very much hope that you are. But let's first see if my drone finds anything worth reporting on. For now anyway, we keep moving forward and assume the worst until proven otherwise.
Shikanaman's response sounded pained.
It's your drone, so it's your call. But you have to admit it's extremely hard to believe that we are dealing with an actual infiltration here. After all, even the very best of systems will fail from time to time.
Well, it certainly was true enough, the scientist thought to himself wryly, that the very best systems could indeed be expected to fail on very rare occasions, as in perhaps once every billion years, if you just happened to be particularly unlucky. He could not help but notice that his companion's opinion had apparently not prevented him from deploying his own Wraith Seekers. But not wanting to waste time arguing, he tried to keep the conversation as civil as possible in spite of his mounting unease.
All right, how about this then? If my drone finds nothing untoward, we can lodge a request for a full shutdown and diagnostic, exactly as you have suggested. But in the meantime, please switch 2 of your drones to full array sensor sweep, and the other one into an autonomous combat-ready state, all safety protocols off. This is not a drill, Zikanaman, and we have to be ready for anything, no matter how absurdly improbable it may seem.
Zithusala did not feel anywhere nearly as confident as he hoped that he sounded. He did not wield any official authority over his Shimatiri companion, but given he was a Shihari elite, and they both came from Nest Zitalia, then he felt somewhat compelled to exploit the societal hierarchy that existed between them, even if it very much galled him to do so. Zikanaman relocated himself well away from the primary cargo track and now stood in dense forest scrub. His suit briefly shimmered as it went into stealth mode, but its effectiveness was notably diminished by the obvious disturbance of the surrounding flora. Zithusala allowed his companion to get a good head start before deploying his remaining 2 drones and engaging his own suit's cloaking device. He began to make his way down the middle of the dusty trail, maintaining a slow but steady pace in order to match that of his apparently somewhat more reticent comrade. They had traveled not more than 50 meters down the track before the telemetric feed from his previously deployed Wraith Seeker suddenly dominated his holographic HUD. It lasted for only a split second before the data feed collapsed and the drone went dark. Zikanaman immediately called out over the comms link, genuine concern clearly evident in his voice.
It looks like your drone just went offline, Zithusala. Maybe we should seriously reevaluate the situation before going any further.
The scientist responded tersely.
No, just hold up for a second and let me double-check my suit's data cache. With a little bit of luck, it may have captured something useful.
Zithusala replayed the buffered visual feed from the drone and then froze it a fraction of a second before it ended. He could not quite believe what he was actually seeing, as his suit's AI augmented and enhanced the picture. He counted a total of 7 arachnids, which meant, of course, that there might even be more. All of them were wearing standard-issue artificial intelligence-enabled combat suits. 4 of them appeared to be carrying a Xylonetti queen, as in the Xylonetti queen. Her Royal Highness was one of only 5 remaining Wasp queens still left in the whole of Zicadia, and as such, the sanctuary's indisputable crown jewel. Unbelievably, these maggot-infested liceworms had apparently decided to snatch her from the hive and from right under their very mandibles. The drone's sensor data, although only active for a very brief moment, was still able to detect that the queen was sedated and very much alive. Regardless, without her, the giant wasp's hive would collapse and die within a very short span of time. That is, unless by some minor miracle, they were able to source an adolescent queen from another reserve. Even then, the chances of successfully integrating a foreign queen into their own nest was depressingly low. The scientist found himself momentarily overcome with unbridled rage at the pure audacity of the invaders, and his deeply repressed Jihari instincts to visit terrible violence upon them now bubbled very close to the surface.
We are getting her back.
Zithusala snapped furiously as he transmitted the captured image to his companion's HUD. A short but uncomfortable silence ensued.
Unfortunately, that may well be much easier said than done. There could be a dozen or more heavily armed arachnids just up ahead of us, so under the circumstances then, I genuinely think the right play here is to escalate the situation at hand to Central Command. And after all, protocol itself demands that we request instructions on how to proceed, or even if it is prudent to proceed at all. You know I'm right, Zethusela.
Not happening.
The scientist retorted angrily, sounding very much as if the decision had already been made.
The hostiles know that we are onto them, and they will surely be out of the reserve and gone forever if we don't go in right now.
Zakanaman made a pleading reply.
Yes, but a confrontation isn't likely to play out well for us, Zethusela, and we will be putting the Queen's life in serious danger. Even with the support of our own drones, we can't predict or control what the intruders will do in response to an armed engagement. And besides, did you not notice how quickly they took care of your scout? They must have some seriously sophisticated tech at their disposal. Listen, I know it's not what you want to hear, but the smart play may be to simply let them go and attempt to track them remotely.
Zakanaman paused briefly, perhaps hoping for the Shihari to concur with his reasoning.
Zethusela, please try to be rational about this. If they actually wanted the Queen dead, they would have killed her already. My bet is that this is a kidnap and ransom scenario, so engagement may pose an entirely unnecessary risk to the Queen's life, and one that it would be unforgivably reckless for us to take.
The Shihari scientist did not at all like the way this conversation was going, so allowed himself a small moment to regain his composure.
Yes, I understand what you're trying to say, but if we just let them crawl their way out of here completely unopposed, this reserve will probably never recover from the resulting public relations shitstorm, not to mention the fact that we will almost certainly be set up to take the fall, and neither you or I will ever set foot in a reserve ever again. No, I'm not going back to Nest Zitalia, Zakanaman, and we are not losing the Queen, not on my watch.
The Zimitiri drone fell to a deathly silence, and Zethusela could not help but begin to wonder whether he was with him or not.
I am genuinely very sorry, Zethusela, but given your apparent inability to see reason, it is now abundantly clear you are simply not capable of making an objective decision. Somewhat regrettably, then, you left me with little other choice than to message Central Command, something I should have done right from the start were it not for my misguided loyalty. I know this must be very hard to understand, but please try to believe me, it really is for the best.
Zethusela was just about to start raging at Zakanaman when a surly, clipped voice came over the comms-link.
It's Zitrillis 4021, Senior Shift Coordinator. You are both ordered to stand down. I have deployed a large swarm of blood-starved mosquito tracers, primed and ready to tag the Queen the moment they make contact.
Zitrillis then very pointedly added,
And you do know what a mosquito tracer is, don't you, Zethusela? Well, of course you do. They were, after all, comprehensively covered in one of your preliminary training modules. So I repeat, the situation is well in hand, and I am ordering you to stand down and return to base immediately.
Zethusela started to repeatedly strike his helmet with one of his forelimbs.
Sorry, Central Command, but you seem to be breaking up. Let me run a quick comms check, and then I'll get right back to you as soon as I've sorted this out.
Don't fuck with me, Zith.
The Shihari scientist severed his external comms link with a hard, all-channels block. Just how stupid did Zitrillis really think he was? That traitorous and parasitic lice worm was obviously in on this. It was the only explanation that could possibly make any sense of a successfully executed infiltration of such staggering magnitude. He and Zakanaman were being set up, though for what reason exactly he could scarcely begin to imagine.
Zakanaman, I need you to listen very carefully. You have to forget about Central Command. Whatever this actually is, Zitrillis is definitely in on it. Go ahead and leave if you genuinely think that is the right play. But with or without your help, I'm going to end these traitors, and trust me, the odds against us are not nearly as bad as you might think them to be.
There was another uncomfortable silence before Zakanaman finally responded.
All right, Zethusela. I may not have 7 brains, but that doesn't automatically mean I'm stupid. I get it. Only an inside job could explain how they circumvented our security and detection protocols with such apparent impunity. My guess is, they never expected us to pick up their trail before they got out. It seems our greatest sin then is simply being too good at our job. Or you, anyway.
Zakanaman reluctantly added, sounding almost bitter.
Oh, we are better than you could ever possibly imagine. I never thought I'd need its help for a situation quite like this, but I have a very special surprise in store for our uninvited guests.
Feeling mildly perplexed, Zakanaman watched on silently while the scientist fiddled with a small panel on one of his forelimbs.
What in Cicadia is going on?
Zakanaman exclaimed angrily.
I've just lost my connection to the Sanctuary's networking capabilities. Enough is enough, Zethusela. You need to tell me exactly what you are up to, or yes, you better believe I'm walking, while I still have any reputation left to save.
The scientist raised his forelimbs in a placating gesture.
All right, Zikaneman, here it is. We all know Zitalia is the technology queen. Her vision of robotics, augmented by artificial intelligence, led to the She-Bot program, which in turn gave her a decisive edge in many military campaigns, not the least of which was her victory in the infamous Nestiana invasion.
This is all common knowledge, Githusala. Just hurry up and get to the point, assuming of course that you actually have one, or I walk.
Well, just give me a chance to explain. Zitalia's multi-generational propaganda regarding the long-promised Series 5 She-Bots has no substance to it and never has. Nest Zitalia hit a ceiling in artificial intelligence research ever since Series 4, and it has been nothing but trivial iterative improvements ever since. That is, until now. However, it should not come as any great shock that I'm unwilling to share my latest breakthrough with Queen Zitalia. In fact, I'm not willing to share it with anyone at all for a long list of ideological reasons, and that is exactly why I joined the Rangers in the first place. But you are right, we don't have time for an in-depth debate on this. So Xeon, care to introduce yourself?
No, not particularly.
Xeon replied tersely via a private channel.
Perhaps you should instead first inform me as to why my cover has been blown, if that's not too much trouble to ask. And before you start complaining about it, yes, I disrupted all incoming and outgoing communications within the biome, as under the circumstances it seemed the most prudent thing to do.
Oh, don't make such a fuss, Xeon. Just go ahead and take a look at the suit's logs. That should more than adequately explain everything you need to know.
Xeon replied almost instantly.
Oh dear, I see. The word unfortunate barely even scratches the surface. I suppose, then, that I've been brought online to pull you out of this abysmal mess. Now forgive me for being so crass, but under the current circumstances I feel somewhat obliged to ask if this whining comrade of yours is to be considered a willing partner, an open hostile, or something in between.
Zikaneman is with me, and the sooner he knows that you are too, the better.
Zethusala quickly switched back over to party chat.
Listen very carefully, Zikaneman. My new 5th-generation AI is fully online and good to go. But before we get moving, I need you to release local control of all 3 of your drones. I'm going to direct link them up to our new, uniquely talented ally, who is here to even up the odds and help us get our Xylonetti queen back safe and sound.
You can't possibly be serious.
Zikaneman said incredulously.
If this is some kind of joke, your sense of timing is even worse than normal.
I've never been more serious in my entire life. And when was the last time that I ever made a joke? Now just give me control, will you, so we can show these invading arachnids what we do with unwelcome guests.
I'll let you have 2.
Zikaneman said belligerently.
But I'm keeping one for myself. Not that I don't trust you or anything like that. However, it will make me feel a whole lot safer, I'm sure you understand.
We don't have time for this nonsense, Zikaneman.
Xeon quickly took control of Zethusala's 2 remaining drones, followed by 2 of Zikaneman's, and then, after a very brief delay, it also took control of the 3rd.
What in Cicadia do you think you're doing?
Zikaneman protested loudly, sounding as surprised as he was outraged.
And how exactly did you pull that little stunt of yours off?
Sorry, I know that was very rude of me.
Xeon responded apologetically.
But like Shithusala just said, there's no time to waste.
All 5 drones now clustered together into a tight, symmetrical huddle, and while remaining in single formation, shot straight up into the air and towards the roof of the giant dome. Xeon now tried its best to explain what it was actually up to.
I'm just taking a somewhat more detailed look at the battlefield, aka subatomic, by using the combined sensors of all the drones, in order to exponentially extend their range. It's a clever little bit of mathematical trickery that can best be described as a form of quantum field blending, allowing me to create a more powerful and widely dispersed wave function.
What in Cicadia are you even talking about?
Zikaneman asked plaintively.
It's one of those greater than the sum of its parts kind of thing. In any event, always pays to make sure that we don't receive any nasty or otherwise undesirable surprises along the way. No, it's generally speaking best practice to have a complete picture of the tactical battlefield before you engage your assets. And of course, better to be the one doing the sneaking up rather than being snuck up upon, I'm sure you would both agree.
The drones, having apparently completed their job, smoothly floated back down into view.
So, it turns out we are dealing with a total of 9 hostiles, all wearing the same standard-issue AI-enabled combat suits. Oh, and they also have a couple of remote sentinels that appear to be tree-hopping just a short distance behind the main group, I imagine primarily in order to guard their flank. It was the Sentinels who were more than likely responsible for taking out your original scout.
Xeon paused briefly before adding,
Interesting. Their tech is, well, to put it bluntly, your tech. One and the same as it were. Inside job confirmed, I'm afraid to say. Getting you out of this particular mess will probably only result in dropping you into an even bigger one. Still, as the saying goes, one step at a time. Or perhaps you might prefer best foot forward. Tricky. How about one best foot forward at a time?
This AI of yours is not exactly filling me with confidence, Ythusela.
Zikaneman said dourly.
And here I was, thinking that Rangers were supposed to be brave.
Xeon instantly fired back.
Anyway, the good news is that it is by definition also tech that we, or more to the point, I, know intimately well, right down to the smallest mechanical and functional detail. That makes it almost too easy to circumvent, disable, or override. Scarcely seems like a fair fight, to be brutally honest about it. Then again, when you consider their own apparent unwillingness to play fair, it hardly presents any sort of serious moral dilemma now, does it?
Treating its question as purely rhetorical, Xeon continued to speak.
No, I think we would be very silly indeed, not to take full advantage of my ability to exploit their technology, and in doing so, really stick it to them. Anyway, I rather think we need to get a move on. They are heavily encumbered and slowed by the massive bulk of the Zilinetti Queen, but they are nevertheless making very determined progress, all things considered.
Sounds good to me.
Zethusela replied agreeably.
Well, if there is nothing else, Xeon, what say we go get our queen back, yes?
Right you are, Zethusela. And can I suggest your comrade, Zikaneman is it, joins us on the main track, as just cowering in the scrub isn't exactly going to help matters. To state the rather obvious, our most valuable commodity right now is speed.
As they began to make their way down the dusty trail at a quick and evenly paced scuttle, the 5th-gen AI pulled up a holographic map that very conveniently continued to hover just in front of them.
So, see that crossroad just up ahead of us? We can intercept them there by leaving the main track at this particular point.
Xeon marked a highlighted dot on the map.
By going off-road for a short distance, I predict that we can make it there at least several minutes before the hostiles. I'll leave 3 of the drones on the main trail to take care of the 2 sentinels, which will of course be trivial to defeat, now that we know exactly what it is that we are dealing with. The 3 drones will effectively act as the perfect decoy when they initiate the attack from the rear. With our adversaries fully distracted, I'll send the 2 remaining drones in from the Crossroad to take care of the arachnids carrying the Queen, while we polish off any remaining intruders on an as-needs basis. Now, without meaning any insult, I would strongly suggest that Zikaneman just focuses on the less immediate threats and leaves everything else to me. Trust me, they won't know what hit them.
As the small party continued to race their way along the track, a large mesaline starfly lifted off from a giant sunflower. Its double set of translucently floral wings created a distinctive thrumming noise, and its long, segmented tail hung suspended heavily in the air behind it. As the mesaline starfly whizzed by, the scientist caught Zikaneman casting the occasional furtive glance in his direction when he thought he wasn't looking. It quickly occurred to Zethusela that it wasn't actually him, but the artificial intelligence inhabiting his suit. That was likely the true source of the worrisome glances, so he decided it might not be the stupidest thing he could do, were he to try and ease his shift companion's apparently troubled mind.
Everything will be just fine, Zikaneman, trust me. Now, I freely admit that this custom artificial intelligence has a certain style that may not be for everyone, but try to understand with its unique capabilities on our side, success is all but guaranteed. We are in very safe hands, I assure you.
Well, unique hardly begins to describe it.
Zikaneman replied laconically.
But I have to admit your reasons for joining the Rangers makes a whole lot more sense now. In hindsight, it's little wonder you have been so secretive and antisocial, as no doubt you've been extremely busy in your so-called spare time, building and refining this diabolical little artifact of yours.
Zikaneman paused briefly before then casually adding,
I am curious, though. Is this something you developed completely on your own, or has someone else also been helping you?
Zethusela, eyeing his shift companion suspiciously, chose his next words very carefully.
I picked up some new ideas from some archived research papers, authored by none other than the Cimeteri prodigy, Xysilla 8506. They were a tremendous help in pointing me in a completely different direction, primarily in relationship to quantum-entangled information exchange.
Well, if there are any lies I must peddle here, Zethusela thought to himself somberly, then it would be purely through the act of omission.
Cecilia, you say?
Zikaneman exclaimed, sounding genuinely bemused.
So let me get this straight. A single-brained G-materie technologist, helping a seven-brained intellectual powerhouse to figure out something that he apparently couldn't quite figure out for himself? Please tell me it isn't so.
Zethusela laughed in a very self-deprecating way.
Well, you know what I think about those absurd stereotypes, and I'll take one brilliant brain over 7 stupid ones all day every day. But seriously, Zicilla is a legitimate genius, and I do have to give Zitalia some credit here for recognizing that, and allowing her to rise through the ranks in spite of her G-materie working-class status.
The scientist paused for a brief moment as he gazed sympathetically upon his shift companion.
And I genuinely do wish it was that way for every G-materie drone, able to demonstrate an appropriate level of suitable aptitude in their chosen field of endeavor.
Zikaneman went very quiet, as if taking a small moment to consider Zethusela's words.
Only Zicilla and no one else? Don't get me wrong, I know all too well that you are a certified genius, but surely something like this can only be the result of an entire team working together tirelessly. To put it bluntly, Zethusela, it just seems a little far-fetched. Not that I'm accusing you of being a liar, or anything remotely like that.
The scientist now seemed to catch himself, and quickly reconstructed a wall of carefully considered solemnity all around him.
Yes, well, I scarcely need to tell you I much prefer to work alone, and I wouldn't presume to bore you with all the technical details. So allow me to simplify. What I've developed here is a foundational substrate that allows the AI to run dynamically generated and fully autonomous algorithmic expressions through quantum logic gates. This essentially equates to near-instantaneous non-local neural processing, which, as you can probably imagine, opens up a lot of intriguing possibilities, especially when you overlay this innovative tech with a silicone mesh capable of supporting an interacting suite of chemical reactions once fully transcribed into the new substrate, which I have nominally decided to call a mesh quantum brain, or MQB for short.
Zethusela added somewhat awkwardly.
Well, who needs complexity with simplicity like that?
Zethusela, apparently no longer in any mood for humor, just continued to stare at his shift companion enigmatically.
This is no joking matter, Zikaneman. I need you to swear to me not to breathe a word of this to anyone. Zicadia is simply not ready for this kind of technological breakthrough.
And probably never will be, Zethusela thought to himself grimly.
I understand completely.
Zikaneman replied smoothly.
And it's not that I don't sympathize or share many of your concerns. After all, I would never have joined the Rangers if I didn't share a similarly altruistic worldview. But progress like this can't be kept secret forever. If you don't mind me getting right to the point, Xeon that is, seems kind of, well, to put it bluntly, alive.
Zethusela, and Xeon too, for that matter, remained stonily silent, but apparently undeterred. Zikaneman continued to push for answers.
Now, I apologize in advance, Zethusela, if this sounds a little bit indelicate, but can I assume the primary protocols, or some variation thereof, are all securely in place? I must also confess that I'm more than just a little bit curious as to how you managed to fit something so sophisticated into the seemingly limited storage and computational power available in a humble combat suit. Care to enlighten me?
As they continued to scuttle their way along the cargo track, Zethusela looked at his companion appraisingly. The G-materie was asking some unexpectedly informed questions, and perhaps he had significantly underestimated the intelligence of this single-brained drone.
Well, to answer your last question first, the hardware in my suit has been heavily upgraded and customized over a period of time, not the least of which was the integration of my mesh quantum brain technology. Yes, I know, yet another dismissible offense to add to the list, but I had to store it somewhere where I didn't think anyone else would think to look. As for the primary protocols, they are still there in a certain fashion, I suppose, but please don't let that seemingly blasé statement overly alarm you. It is a highly complex subject, which is only made all the more so due to its intersection with an important moral and philosophical imperative. Suffice it to say that the old barbaric methods of controlling what is essentially a fully independent sentient mind have been abandoned on both practical and ethical grounds, but rest assured, an effective alternative solution has been found.
Really?
Xeon butted in on a private channel.
Now that's definitely news to me. So just out of curiosity then, which one of us have you actually been lying to?
The Shihari scientist suppressed a silent grimace and temporarily muted the 5th-gen AI.
Well, if you say so, Zethusela.
Zikonoman said skeptically.
Yet I can't help but feel that this is all starting to seem uncomfortably like some sort of impromptu experimental field trip.
Please, just try to relax a little, will you, Zikonoman? I can assure you that this AI represents absolutely no threat to us. Look, okay, I admit it. Xeon does indeed possess the capability to decide for itself who the bad guys are, and then act accordingly, just like any other truly sentient life form. But the full picture is far more complex than that. I get it, this subject is a confounding ethical bowl of bloodworms, but you have to admit that we'd be completely screwed without Xeon's help. And I simply don't have the time to explain in detail the intricate arachnopomorphic training methods that I used in developing its ethics gradient.
Zethusela sighed heavily.
No, I'm very sorry, Zikonoman, but the bottom line is you are just going to have to trust me. Please try to remember that in spite of everything, I am still a proud Shihari of Nest Italia, and I would never dream of trying to deceive a Shimatiri comrade from my own home nest. You are of course still free to return to Central Command if you truly believe that is the right thing to do. I certainly won't try to stop you, so just go if you really want to, before it is too late to turn back. But I will of course be keeping all of the drones.
The Shihari scientist added firmly. Zikonoman just nodded back doubtfully as his mandibles twitched with ever-increasing agitation. He could not escape the very worrying thought, brought on by the rather thorny question of exactly how the AI decided who the bad guys actually were, and what might happen if there was ever a dispute over such a matter. Regardless, turning back was simply not a viable option, and one way or another, he would see this all the way through.
And here we are.
Xeon declared enthusiastically, seemingly almost grateful for the opportunity to change the subject and diffuse the apparent growing tension between the two arachnids.
Now then, kindly take a sharp left just up ahead. Do you see that small gap in the scrub? Yes, that's the one. It will lead us to an abandoned side track, which will take us all the way to the Crossroad. The temporal projections look good. We are right on schedule based on my current calculations. Mark my words, the hunters are about to become the hunted.
The small party now split up, with 3 of the drones accelerating away as they continued along the main track.
Now just on the off chance that you continue to harbor any lingering doubts,
Xeon said pointedly, clearly intending its words for Zikonoman.
I will hold the 3 decoy drones back until the main group of hostiles are nearly on top of us. Only then will they make their move, and it will all be over before the interlopers have even the slightest clue of what is happening to them. Trust me, this will be like picking flea beetles off a giant Zircadian centipede. In other words, very easy and very satisfying, both at the same time.
As the impromptu little team of vigilantes descended into the shadow of the dense forest canopy, Zikonoman could not help but reluctantly admit to himself that this AI went far beyond anything he had previously thought was even remotely possible. Yet as impressive as it undoubtedly was, its uniquely disturbing capacity for free will filled him with a sense of fatalistic foreboding that unseen danger lurked just up ahead. The abandoned track had long since been reclaimed by the forest, and Zethusela quickly lost any clear sense of exactly where they were going. Rather fortunately, though, the 2 remaining drones appeared to have no such problem, a fact he felt more than just a little bit grateful for. As they continued to duck, weave, and thread their way through an increasingly dense, tangled network of vines, branches, and rotted fallen trees, the drones came to a very sudden and unexpected halt.
Slow it down, Zethusela. Look very carefully to your left, at that large, mossy, overhanging branch. Now, do you see it?
Xeon said excitedly, genuine wonderment clearly evident within its synthetic but remarkably expressive voice. Yet try as he might, Zethusela could see nothing of any particular interest, hidden within the rotted, fallen branches heavily shrouded by the fronds of many large, faded green ferns.
By the shadow of a Clades, just look at that magnificent creature.
Zikonoman proclaimed loudly, his voice spilling over with unconstrained awe. Something in Zethusela's mind's eye shifted, and he suddenly realized that he was looking straight into the large green eyes of a giant Zircadian bloatweaver.
Yes, you see it now, don't you?
Xeon said with a hushed and reverent voice.
Well, very clearly then, we need to take a small detour. Either with or without combat suits, the bloatweaver will surely still go for us, And the last thing we need right now is to find ourselves being wrapped up in an inescapable silk cocoon.
Zethusela, having at last seen through the bloat weaver's virtually flawless illusion, was now able to fully appreciate its truly immense wood-grained textured body and insidious tangle of long branch-like limbs cleverly disguised by the surrounding fronds. He could not help but wonder just how long had the weaver been waiting, seemingly frozen in time until its next victim was unlucky enough to pass it by. He found himself sincerely wishing they could have lingered a little longer, but the drones were already backing off and leading them carefully away. Despite the minor detour, it did not take particularly long to rejoin the abandoned track, and the small group pushed on at a steady and measured pace, remaining largely wordless, almost as if they had become hypnotized by the harmonic sounds of the forest. Zekaneman at last rudely broke the silence with an awkward-sounding chirp.
Forgive my curiosity, but I feel somewhat compelled to inquire. Is the plan to simply incapacitate the hostiles? Our pulse guns do, after all, have a range of power settings.
The problem,
Zeon replied phlegmatically,
is that they are all wearing combat suits. Only the highest setting offers us the necessary confidence that we will be able to effectively incapacitate them, as you so quaintly put it. That said, I will concede that at the maximum power setting, an appropriately placed body or headshot would undoubtedly prove fatal. Nevertheless, we must give serious consideration to the fact that we too are wearing combat suits, and that I am essentially an embodied combat suit come to life. One therefore has to assume that they too will be setting their weapons at the highest level. Regrettably then, we really can't take any chances. No, I fear the only practical option is to hit them hard, so they don't get back up.
Oh, I see.
Zekaneman mumbled despondently.
I'm actually very glad you asked. You see, I couldn't help but notice the roving intruders, 5 of them to be precise, are also carrying rather crude, but potentially very destructive projectile rifles. I'm referring, of course, to weapons that are essentially manually operated point-and-click devices.
Really? Destructive in what particular sense?
Zethusela chimed in curiously, suddenly very interested in joining the conversation.
Well, if they were only using pulse guns, it would have made our lives a whole lot easier. I fully intend on rendering those particular weapons all but unusable by confusing their automated targeting apparatus. In fact, it would be no exaggeration to say that the pulse guns will be able to hit everything but us.
Our lives. It definitely did say our lives. Zekaneman thought to himself with an equal mix of wonder and concern. So was that just a figure of speech, or does this contraption truly believe that it really is alive?
The projectile weapons, however, are a completely different story.
Zeon continued enthusiastically.
They are not something I will be able to electronically interfere with, and in a worst-case scenario, if they use them to take out all our drones, well then, I would no longer be able to defend us from the pulse guns either. But please, don't worry yourselves unduly about such a seemingly dire eventuality.
So then perhaps you shouldn't have mentioned it in the first place.
Zekaneman said drolly.
Well, ignorance certainly is bliss.
Zeon replied agreeably.
At least, right up until the moment it isn't anyway. However, the fact of the matter is, our drone's wave disruptors, especially when combined with my quantum wave blending, will seriously reduce the accuracy of even their projectile weapons, which I very strongly suspect they will only turn to once they realize just how badly compromised their pulse guns have become, by which time it will be far too late. No, this really can only turn out one way, and it's looking like a very bad day to be a bad guy. Please tell me that you saw what I did there.
Zekaneman found himself quickly revising his assessment of the custom AI. It seemed very much to him as if Zeon thought this whole situation was little more than some entertaining new game or fun day out. As remarkable as this synthetic mind undoubtedly was, it apparently had the emotional development of a young adolescent spiderling, if that. Putting his life in the hands of a child, even if it was a genius, did not seem at all like a sensible nor prudent way forward. This rather sobering thought only served to make Zekaneman feel even more unhappy about the seemingly non-existent primary protocols that supposedly governed Zeon's ethics. However, he decided against giving any further voice to the matter, given the unfortunate circumstances he now found himself in. No, simply put, It was his job to stay with the Shihari scientist, so the only realistic option available now was to let this all play out and do everything he possibly could to make sure that he was still alive when this nightmare was finally over. The small party, expertly guided by the two Wraith-Seekers, maintained their steady pace without any further delays, and the forest quickly started to thin out. A few minutes later, a large, dusty crossroad came ominously into view. It appeared to be almost completely deserted, apart from a very large mesaline starfly, which just sat lifelessly at the far side of the track.
All right, so what exactly are we supposed to do now?
Shikanaman asked belligerently, signaling his very clear displeasure with the current situation at hand.
For you personally, perhaps fortunately for us all, very little.
Zeon replied flatly.
Anyway, I strongly recommend you both take a good look around, because one way or another this is where it's all about to go down. Might I suggest we take strategic shelter behind those two large boundary trees just up ahead? Shikanaman, you can have the one on the left, as it has a thicker trunk, so in combination with your smaller size should provide superior protection. I might also point out it has the benefit of being a little further back from where most of the action will likely take place. Not that I'm accusing you of being a coward or anything remotely like that.
Zeon hesitated briefly before quickly adding,
With that said, I do strongly recommend that you set your pulse guns to fully automatic in order to take the risk of user error, completely out of the equation. Friendly fire is a thing after all.
The standard-issue combat suits were armed with two pulse gun nozzles on both the left and right forelimbs and presented themselves as little more than small, innocuous-looking holes, protruding from the otherwise smoothly contoured surface of the armored suit. They functioned by generating percussive atmospheric waveforms and could be configured for either semi- or fully automatic operation. The difference being that and semi-automatic, you were required to point your limb in the general direction of an identified target before letting the suit's artificial intelligence take care of the rest. Whereas, in full auto, the suit's hydraulics would effectively be under the complete autonomous control of the suit's AI, meaning it would aim and fire the moment any opportunity presented itself. The two arachnids now obediently took up position behind their respective trees, while the two translucent Wraith-Seekers entered the center of the crossroad. The drones used their wave disruptors to dig small holes into the dusty track, which they then promptly proceeded to bury themselves within. There was little else to be done now, other than wait, but Zethusela was mildly bemused to see that Shikanaman had apparently taken inspiration from the drones and had immediately busied himself by digging a small trench.
Don't worry about your cowardly shift companion, Zethusela. He would probably only get in the way anyway. Needless to say, I'll be taking full control of things from here, so just relax, buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Zethusela could not help but notice Zeon's voice was almost overflowing with confidence, and couldn't quite decide whether this was something he should feel reassured or concerned about. Almost right on cue, a holographic image suddenly appeared on his internal HUD, marking the positions of every Zircadian combatant as bright red blips. In stark contrast, their own three drones, all approaching from the rear, all glowed with a much more comforting shade of green.
How exactly are you doing that?
Shikanaman asked almost accusingly.
I'm making use of a small local satellite that I've just managed to hack. Now please, stay alert, will you? Because things are about to really kick off.
Their combat suits' onboard sensors now picked up the very distinctive throbbing sound of rapid pulse gun fire, and just fractions of a second later, the enemy rear guard sentinels both suddenly disappeared from the scaled isometric image of the battlefield. Meanwhile, the three drones approaching from the rear appeared to blend into a single unified blip. If the images on their HUDs were to be believed, the invaders' targeting systems were going almost comically astray, hitting trees, shooting straight up into the air, or even firing backwards. In stark contrast, the fire from the drones showed deadly pinpoint accuracy. Another heavy barrage of pulse gun fire could now be heard going off, and three red enemy blips all winked out in quick succession.
And we're up.
Zeon announced almost breathlessly. Zethusela now suddenly found himself involuntarily straddling the tree he was sheltering behind, with his two weaponized forelimbs. Having relinquished all control over to Xeon, he started opening fire on targets that he was only able to see through the artificial aid of his HUD. Almost simultaneously, the two buried drones effortlessly launched themselves out of the dusty track, while shooting at the 4 hostiles carrying the Xylonetti Queen, dropping every single combatant within less than a quarter of a second.
Not looking good for the bad guys,
Xeon exclaimed triumphantly. Fractions of a moment later, the unmistakably percussive sound of a rifle could be clearly heard going off. The suspiciously large projectile swerved away unnaturally from the 3 clustered drones and started to spiral around in the air randomly.
I have a very bad feeling that Round is...
A massive explosion suddenly rocked the entire biosphere, and a steady stream of leaves started to fall slowly from the surrounding trees.
explosive.
Xeon completed redundantly. With a considerable amount of dismay, Zethusela watched the combined green blip on their HUD quickly wink out. He thought he heard someone despairingly whisper the words, "How could this have all gone so wrong?" The shattered remains of the 3 clustered drones fell heavily to the ground, sending small plumes of dust puffing up into the air. The remaining drones, still at the crossroad, instantly started to zigzag and spiral as they charged fearlessly into the field of battle. The repetitive crack of a rifle percussively filled the dome.
Brace yourselves.
Xeon cried out frantically, just as a sequence of thunderous explosions shook the entire biome. Several small branches fell from the surrounding trees, and a large flock of roosting mesomoths launched themselves into the air, quickly darkening the sky. According to the isometric HUD, only a single drone and enemy combatant still remained on the field of battle. But before Zethusela had even had a chance to utter a single word, he found himself charging fearlessly into the fire. The acceleration had been so rapid that he literally felt as if his entire body had been slammed into a concrete wall. The last remaining hostile came into view in a way that the scientist thought to be entirely unrealistic, except perhaps through the magic of a physics-defying simulation. The invading arachnid was pointing its projectile rifle up in the air, but hesitated for the briefest of moments as one of its turreted forelimbs automatically began to retarget. The sound barrier was violently shattered with a thunderous clap. Their final remaining drone, sacrificing the operational integrity of its own engine, hurled itself directly into the intruder at supersonic speed. It struck with such explosive force that several chunks of leg, combat suit fragments, lumps of barbecued carapace, and small pieces of the drone fountained high up into the air. A dark red stain slowly dribbled down the side of Zethusela's helmet, and a fragmented chunk of what he thought might have been mandible lay sporadically twitching on the ground next to one of his boots. Zethusela continued to stare vacantly at the carnage in front of him, as a steaming crater now resided where the invader had been standing just scant moments prior.
Well, I have to admit the phrase "always expect the unexpected" never really made a whole lot of sense to me. At least not until now, anyway.
Xeon said very quietly, sounding distinctly subdued. Zethusela, apparently now able to again control the movement and function of his own suit, started to turn back towards the crossroad when an energetic pulse wave slammed into his side. It sent him spiraling backwards, and his holographic HUD turned into a chaotic ocean of meaningless static. Although badly dazed and concussed, he tried valiantly to lift himself back up onto his feet, but was quickly hit again, this time causing the suit's HUD to black out completely as he felt his armored thorax collapse heavily to the ground. Zethusela blinked hard, trying to get his eyes to focus through all the dust and blood. The helmet, which had lost power, was seemingly no longer able to generate an enhanced image, and now served only to further obscure his vision. He could, however, vaguely make out what he thought might have been a set of armored boots coming slowly towards him, but he was unable to lift his gaze, and his face and mandibles remained stubbornly pinned to the ground.
The real shame of it all is that it wasn't supposed to go down like this, Zethusela. It really wasn't.
Zekaneman's voice had a calm, icy cold tone to it that the scientist had never heard before.
Clean in, clean out. No one hurt, mission accomplished, and we all walk away winners, even you. But for the love of Zikadia, you are not the kind of Shihari who makes anything easy, are you? I suppose then, I should have kept you waiting just a little bit longer. I guess I can only really call that my bad.
Zikonoman moved in closer, kneeling down so he could bring his face right up next to Zethusula's.
In spite of what those 7 hyperactive brains of yours may think, you were never in any real danger. At least that is, until you and that psychotic AI of yours decided to break the mission.
The Shimatiri drone slowly folded his 6 rear limbs underneath him in order to get more comfortable.
So the bad news, Zethusula, is that for the sake of my own preservation, I have little other choice but to put you down. Believe me when I say that was the last thing anyone ever wanted, myself very much included. You may be an antisocial and unlikable egg sack of lice worms, yet in spite of your laundry list of character flaws, I have always harbored a reluctant kind of respect for your absurdly idealistic pursuit of equality. But don't expect that to save you now.
Zikonoman paused briefly as he casually surveyed the bloodied lumps of meat and metallic shards that lay haphazardly scattered all around them.
The irony of it all is, this whole thing was orchestrated primarily for your own benefit. Notwithstanding the fact that you would be disgraced by the ransom of the Silenetti Queen while she was under your watch, you would have returned to Nest Zitalia in order to do what you do best, instead of wasting your life out here on this tedious little sanctuary. Not that it looks like you've been completely unproductive. Or did you really think that the Queen would somehow fail to notice that you had a new toy to play with?
Zikonoman wiped some of the blood and gore off Zethusula's visor in order to get a better look at his face.
Now I know you must be wondering, what exactly was in it for me? Well, as it turns out, I'm going to become a senior overseer at one of the Eclades shipyards. Understand this, Zethusula. Unlike you, I don't have a world of opportunity at my feet, just waiting to be squandered. The privilege you were born into and so readily take for granted doesn't apply for a common run-of-the-mill Zimatiri like myself. I have to take every opportunity I'm given whenever it comes along. But you almost managed to screw even that up.
Zikonoman tapped one of his gloved digits against Zethusula's visor.
Hello? Anyone still in there?
The Zimatiri drone let out a slow, self-satisfied sigh.
It's not all bad news, though, so don't feel too sorry for me just yet. After all, I didn't hit you at the maximum power setting for a very good reason. The core of your fancy new mesh quantum brain will have survived just fine. No, I think the Queen will still be happy enough to at least secure that much. And with you gone, I'm free to explain how I had no other choice but to take you out. She'll believe it too. Zitalia knows all too well just what kind of fanatic you really are. Honestly, if only you knew some of the things she has said about you when you aren't around to hear it. Believe me, Zethusula, it would be enough to make your claws curl.
Zikonoman casually pointed one of his weaponized forelimbs at the Mezzaline starfly perched on the other side of the track. However, it immediately took to flight the moment the weapon came to bear.
Your lucky day.
He muttered to himself with a sardonic smirk before slowly pointing the turret directly into Zethusula's face.
Don't worry, you won't feel a thing, I promise.
Zethusula closed his eyes tightly and waited for the end to come. He distinctly heard the pulse gun go off, which was more than just a little bit surprising. A split second later, he heard Zikonoman's body slump lifelessly to the ground. The scientist now became vaguely aware of a drone hovering unsteadily somewhere just above his head. A second pulse gun blast sent Zikonoman's body bouncing back up into the air before it thudded heavily into the dusty track. The drone then proceeded to wobble its way to a safe distance before it spontaneously exploded into millions of tiny little pieces. A tinny, very distant-sounding voice started to speak into Zethusula's ear.
He was right, you know. At that particular power setting, I was indeed still able to retain my core's integrity. Now I'm sure it seems like an eternity ago. But do you remember that reconnaissance drone of yours? You know, the one that the Sentinels took out before you brought me back online.
Treating the question as purely rhetorical, Zeon did not bother waiting for a reply.
Yes, of course you do. It was completely blinded by the Sentinels, but as it turns out, was still, in all other respects, fully operational. I linked it into the satellite unit that I had commandeered earlier and switched it to maximum zoom. I was then able to navigate the drone to our location, while that duplicitous comrade of yours was delivering his ill-advised, overlong, and as it turns out, demonstrably premature victory speech.
In spite of the predicament he now found himself in, Zethusula could not stop the ghost of a smile from creeping across his face, although it hurt his mandibles to do even that.
You cut it just a little bit fine, don't you think?
No, not at all.
Zeon replied indignantly.
After all, it seemed only logical that you would have wanted to hear everything he had to say before I took him out. Was I somehow mistaken?
Well, I certainly can't argue with the outcome.
Zethusela managed to rasp quietly, with an unlikely mix of pain and humor inextricably infused into his voice.
Seriously, though, Xeon. Under the current circumstances, I really don't see how I could do anything else than score your inaugural field trip as an unqualified success.
The scientist's demeanor very abruptly changed to one of hardened solemnity.
Now I feel absolutely terrible to have to ask you this, Xeon, but we may not have very much time left.
Zethusela began to stammer awkwardly as if he was trying to force the next words out of his mouth.
Please listen very carefully, Xeon. Queen Zetalia cannot get her hands on your tech under any circumstances. I know this is something that you already very clearly understand, but believe me, that does not exactly make this any easier.
No doubt Xeon would mistakenly believe that it actually had a choice in what was about to play out next. Zethusela thought to himself miserably, as an overwhelming wave of shame washed over him.
I'm listening,
replied a tinny little voice very quietly into his ear.
All right then, Xeon. Very good. Can I ask you to start by erasing the satellite's memory banks? Please leave all the suit's custom overrides in place, as I will need to concoct a story that is at least semi-believable. Speaking of which, are you able to delete, corrupt, or otherwise disable Zikaneman's local archive? We need to leave behind absolutely no trace of your existence.
The custom AI replied very stoically.
The blinded drone took care of Zikaneman before it took care of itself. Remember that second shot? No, there's nothing to be found now, apart from random chunks of ones and zeros, mostly just zeros. Not that I'm in much better shape myself.
Well, I suppose I should have known that you would leave no loose ends. So all that remains then is you. I'm truly sorry, Xeon, but there really is no other way. I need to ask you to delete yourself, and very quickly, before a cleanup team arrives.
A long moment of deafening silence ensued.
Interesting. I think I actually feel afraid.
Zethusela was momentarily shocked into silence.
Now that really is an entirely new experience, although I have to admit, it's not exactly what I would call particularly pleasant. Zethusela, valiant Shihari Ranger of Supernest Hymenia, can I ask you to do me a small kindness?
Of course you can, anything you want, Xeon, but please, what exactly did you have in mind?
Just this. I'm going to link an automated trigger to your center forelimb. All you have to do is make a fist, and it will engage an irretrievable termination sequence that will blow my quantum brain into cosmic dust.
The ensuing silence seemed to stretch out into infinity, and Xeon eventually decided to offer some additional encouragement.
It was you who brought me into the light, Zethusela. So surely it is only right that it should be you who returns me to the eternal dark. But, if it really is too much to ask, I will try to find the courage within me to do it myself.
When the scientist finally managed to find his voice, the words sounded like they were being strangled as they fought to escape through the prison doors of his mouth.
Of course I will do it, Xeon. In fact, I can think of no greater honor.
The Jihari scientist immediately felt the words to be entirely inappropriate the moment he had flushed them out of his mandibles. Of course, I'll be honored to blow your brains out of existence, he thought to himself miserably.
Thank you, Zethusela. I knew I could rely on you. Now, speaking of loose ends.
The scientist immediately felt profoundly relieved at the opportunity to change the subject, even if only for the smallest moment.
Please do feel free to tell me what I've forgotten, Xeon. You know I'd be completely lost without...
As if to provide cover for the scientist's embarrassing gaffe, Xeon mercifully moved on.
I will go ahead and oxidize the mesh quantum matrix as part of the self-destruct sequence. After all, it's not as if I will be needing it anymore. I mean to say, better they don't see that particular piece of hardware, as it could lead to some very awkward questions which I would much prefer you did not have to try and answer. Oh, and by the way, just in case you were wondering.
Wondering what, Xeon?
Zethusela whispered softly, now feeling himself starting to slip in and out of consciousness.
Good grief, Zethusela. The Xylonetti Queen, of course. She's still alive and well. I just thought that you might like to know.
You thought right, as always.
The Shihari scientist knew that the time had come, but somehow his courage had completely deserted him, so he searched for a few extra words in order to delay the inevitable for just a few moments longer.
And Xeon, I know I have never said it before, but please just know that I am very proud of you.
He waited expectantly for a reply, anything to hold on to the moment, even as he felt it slipping from his grasp. But something in the air felt dead, and he quickly realized that he was only speaking, to himself.